Hi, welcome to Cinema Savvy and welcome back to another movie review. I'm Chris Garner, here today to give my review on How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, which is the third and final installment in the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy, directed by Dean DeBlois. And guys, you don't know how many takes it's taken me to say his name like that. My mouth can't French in that way. So I'm just going to call him Dean. It's directed by Dean. He was co-director on the first How to Train Your Dragon movie, I believe, and he was the sole director and writer of How to Train Your Dragon 2 and moving into this third one as well. The OCD in me is killing me that I can't call this movie How to Train Your Dragon 3. It's got no number in the title. It's The Hidden World, so I can't call it 3 by good consciousness, despite the fact that it is. I have been a huge fan of this trilogy, although not when it originally came out. I was fairly late to this trilogy. I wasn't really won over by the trailers when the movies were first coming out. And it wasn't until the second movie was already out on DVD where I went back and watched the first two movies, absolutely fell in love with them. I think I even did a double feature that day. I think I watched one and then went straight into two. And then I played the long waiting game like everyone else waiting for this third and final installment. And I guess I should say as well that I am very grateful that this will hopefully, we'll find out in a few years' time, this has been billed as the final installment, and the ending, I'm not going to give the ending away, but it does come full circle and it does feel very conclusive and very fitting and kind of is an emotional ending to this trilogy, and I really hope they keep it there because it's so rare now. And I'm looking at you, Pixar, where they'll have a great trilogy and carry on making them, and it takes away from the cohesiveness of that story, of that trilogy. So as I said, yeah, I've been a big fan of the previous two. And, in terms of modern animated films, I would definitely hold it, especially Dreamworks as well. I've loved Dreamworks' previous animated trilogy of the Kung Fu Panda films, which are by far some of my favourite animated films. And this is now absolutely like a close second in terms of Dreamworks animated trilogies now. In fact, is it the only animated trilogy that Dreamworks has made? I guess you could say Shrek, but that went to 4 movies. I digress. The point is that I absolutely loved the previous two, and in terms of modern animated films, there are scenes in those movies that still absolutely tug on the heartstrings, especially the first How to Train Your Dragon film. It's a very tried and tested story. It's that unlikely friendship where there's threats and everyone besets on that friendship, but ultimately it all works out in the end. It is a very simple story, but it was very effective, and it works for kids as well as adults. And the romantic flight scene, for example, in that first film is phenomenal. And I love the second one as well. The second one got a little bit darker as well, got more involved with the story, and we really did see the character of Hiccup progress into that second movie. And, seeing the trailer for the third movie when it was coming out, I really enjoyed that too, how you really do get that progression in terms of the characters between the movies, and you certainly get that with this movie in particular, not just with the look of the characters, but in terms of, how those characters have advanced believably as well between every entry of the trilogy, which I absolutely loved. First off, I probably need to talk about what the plot of this particular movie is. So the plot, as of IMDb, says, when Hiccup discovers Toothless isn't the only Night Fury, he must seek the Hidden World, a secret dragon utopia, before a hired tyrant named Grimmel finds it first. It's a very simple story. We need to get to place before bad guy captures us and kills us. Very simple story. And in that regard, I'm not saying that, a kid's movie has to have an incredibly involved and complex plot, not by any stretch of the imagination. But I guess I'm just going to go ahead and say this is my least favourite entry in the trilogy. I'm not saying that this is a bad film. I'm not saying that this is a bad kids film, bad animated film, or anything like that. But in terms of the writing, and it's very strange because Dean, insert French-Canadian name here, which I can't say, he is still the writer. It's still the same creative team behind this. But to me, the writing didn't seem as strong on this one. The jokes didn't land with me as much in this one. And there were fewer scenes of heart in this movie. Not to say that there aren't scenes of heart, there are some very emotional beats throughout the movie. But they seemed more few and far between in this particular one. The plot seemed to be the bigger focus, and the plot wasn't all that interesting to me. The theme of this movie as well is also, obviously, if you've seen the trailers for this film, Toothless the dragon finds a female Night Fury, and there are some very funny scenes in the movie where he's, it's the courtship of those two where he's trying to woo this lady dragon. And you get this unwavering sense that Toothless is going to have to go off and be a free dragon, and leave Hiccup at some point. You know, there's another life out there. He needs to be with his own kind. And the main theme of this movie, and really like sort of the realization of Hiccup's character, is that he needs to be his own man. Is everything he's achieved in the past just down to Toothless, or has it also been his inner strength and his inner courage? And that's kind of the dilemma that the character's going through during this movie. However, it kind of sticks the landing in terms of the ultimate message of that. I think that's a great way to take the story. You know, he has had this unbreakable bond with Toothless. Before he met Toothless, he was this weedy, sort of nerdy kid that didn't fit in with anyone. He wasn't a Viking, he wasn't a dragon slayer. But, you know, he proved his worth at the end of the first movie, and especially into the second movie, where he did step up and had to become the chief of Birken, of his village and of his people. And then moving into this movie, obviously, as well, as there is this notion that Toothless might break away at some point, does he have what it takes to, you know, who is he, essentially? So much of his life has been tied to Toothless. Can he actually be his own person? And where I think the movie misses the point of that is that, you know, they keep driving that home all the way through the movie, especially towards the end of the film. But even towards the end, like that would be great. That message, that whole trajectory of the character would be fantastic. If, for example, Hiccup had to do something on his own at the end. You know, if, say, there were two, like, story beats going on, two action beats where Toothless was having to take care of one thing and Hiccup was having to do something else, and through that action he proved that he could, you know, be his own person. He didn't need a dragon in his life to save him or, you know, to help him out in that particular situation. But they never do that. Every situation in this movie, you know, whether Hiccup's falling off something or he's in peril, Toothless is always there to help him. So, you know, it missed the point of its own storytelling, in my opinion. I don't know if anyone else agrees if you've seen the movie. This movie did feel very much of a retread in terms of most of the things in terms of the plot. Not so much the female Night Fury, that stuff I actually really liked, and they were without a doubt my favourite scenes in the movie, which I'll talk about in a minute. You know, in terms of the name of the movie, The Hidden World, there's this hidden dragon utopia out there somewhere that we need to find. Hasn't there been a hidden dragon utopia in all three of these movies now? The first movie had that secret dragon lair where all the dragons were having to kind of offer sacrifice and bring food to a big dragon, a hidden dragon world that no one had seen, that they had to venture out in their big Viking longboats to try and find. The second movie, when we're introduced to Hiccup's mother, she's kind of the leader, or this caretaker, if you will, looking after all these dragons in a hidden dragon utopia, which she doesn't want to see, you know, human encroachers or poachers or hunters to find that particular location. That's a hidden dragon world. And now, boom, How to Train Your Dragon 3. No, there's another hidden dragon world that we need to find, that we need to get to. And it felt very much repeating story threads and story beats in that regard. And even the villain as well. And I will be the first to admit that the villain of these films hasn't been the strongest in all three entries. In fact, the first movie really didn't have a villain per se. I guess it kind of did. It had like the big sort of like mothership dragon almost that the dragons were all, you know, falling under the spell of. And in the second movie you had, what was his name? Drago Bloodfist, which was a great name. That was very much like the first movie, again, in that you had this one big dragon that Drago was controlling, and that dragon could hypnotically control all of the other dragons, all of the lesser dragons. And in this movie we're introduced to the villain of Grimmel, voiced by F. Murray Abraham. For any of you Scarface fans out there, he played the character of Omar Suarez, which was really cool to know when I went onto Wikipedia to find out who did the voice. He's a very nothing villain. He's not intimidating. There's moments towards the beginning where they try to make him intimidating, but it never really comes across the same as Drago's character. In fact, I was reading the production of this movie, and originally it looked like they wanted to bring Drago Bloodfist's character back and redeem him by the end of this movie. But this is according to Wikipedia. Apparently Steven Spielberg convinced the director Dean, insert French name here, to not do that because there wouldn't be enough screen time to devote to his redemption and to, you know, make it believable, to really get that emotion across. So that idea was completely scrapped, and they bring in this new villain. He's a villain that wants to kill Toothless because he's killed all of the other Night Furies, and he wants to kill Toothless because and that's it. Like, just because he's OCD like me, he's completionist. Like, that's literally the only reason. And it's a fairly weak motivation. So he wants to kill all the Night Furies, yet he rides around on a Light Fury. And you know, he has dragons in his control. It's a very weird, and they do bring that up in the movie. They say, well, you have dragons, why do you want to kill all the dragons if you have dragons? And he says, these aren't dragons, these are sort of my pets now, because he can mind control them. I'm like, yeah, but they are still fundamentally dragons. You're missing the point here, clearly, Grimmel. It's a fairly weak motivation. I wasn't intimidated by the villain. There's not really any glorious backstory to him or anything like that. He literally just mentions that he's killed all of the Night Furies and he wants to kill this one, and that's it. So I didn't really care for the story. It felt very meandering in that regard, and I didn't care for the villain. So ultimately, when all of this stuff is going down at the end, I was nowhere near invested in this particular movie as I was with the other two movies, which is a real shame. I feel a bit like I've been very negative on this movie, and I didn't hate this movie. Please don't misunderstand me. I didn't hate this movie. I was just... It is the weakest one to me, and I'm obviously giving my opinions why. But I do want to talk about some positives, and the positives, this has been true to the case of the previous two entries as well, is that relationship between Hiccup and Toothless. It was a beautiful friendship that we've seen develop over these three films. And all of the scenes that kind of go back to that, back to basics kind of approach, back to the first one where, you know, Toothless and Hiccup had that very awkward first meeting. At first it was a very dangerous first meeting where it looked like Toothless was gonna, you know, kill Hiccup. And then you have that great scene where they're sort of drawing pictures of each other and they're breaking the ice and they're trying to get to know each other and establish that friendship. And you have a similar thing in this movie, although it's done more as like that romantic thing between Toothless and the Light Fury. In that he's trying to put on these shows of courtship that he's, you know, very animalistic, sort of like what birds do, for example, like the various displays that they put on and everything like that to try and woo the lady, to try and win the female's affection. And it was all done with little to no dialogue, and it's beautiful. Those scenes are fantastic to watch. They're very, very funny, and they're very engaging in that regard. And it's honestly the quieter scenes like that where there is no dialogue and you can really just take in the scope and the beauty of the animation. And I'll talk about the animation in a second. Those were the moments that really did shine with me, and they were the moments that stayed with me, and why, you know, I can't come down like thunder on this movie. It definitely does still have those scenes in it, but I felt like the previous two movies had more of them. There's another flight sequence in this movie. Nothing that quite compares to the flight sequence from the first one. Romantic flight. I'll talk about the soundtrack as well later on. John Powell's phenomenal soundtrack to all three of these movies. Nothing comes as close to that, because I can still watch that scene from the first movie and tear up every time I watch it, where the animation really does become overwhelmingly beautiful, coupled with the music. It's why I love animated films. It's why I still go and see animated films. There's a scene similar to that where you have the two sort of flying in this hurricane or this tornado looking thing, this thunderstorm. And it's beautiful. There's a scene that almost mirrors Superman the movie with Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder where, you know, they're flying wingtip to wingtip. I was about to say touch tips there, but that's going to give like loads of negative connotations, and I really don't want to tarnish my memories of childhood films with How to Train Your Dragon. Where they touch wingtips. There we go. Get out of that one. And, you know, it is beautiful, and there's little to no dialogue, and it's all just the imagery. And then, unfortunately, we have to get back to the very weak plot. In terms of the storytelling as well, and I guess this is a spoiler alert for How to Train Your Dragon 2 in case you haven't seen that one, but Gerard Butler's character, Hiccup's father, the Chief of Burke, dies at the end of 2, and it's incredibly sad when he dies. It's, you know, it was a fairly ballsy move what they did at the end of that movie to end it on that fairly bittersweet note. I was really hoping there'd be some scenes in this movie where, you know, they do reflect on his death. I think they say that this is 1 year after the events of the second movie. Relatively short amount of time. And no one really talks about him anymore. There's, for example, I'll compare it to another animated trilogy, Kung Fu Panda 3. Kung Fu Panda 3, there's moments where Po and his dad talk to each other about the death of his mom. And, you know, they are very, very heart-wrenching. They're incredibly emotional moments to that film. They still recall back to moments that happened in the previous two and reflect on that and mourn. You know, they still mourn the loss of characters. And I was hoping that they do that in this movie. Now, Gerard Butler's character does return in this movie through a series of flashbacks with young Hiccup, and you really get this sense of legacy, of fatherhood, of family, where you have Gerard Butler's character talking to Hiccup as a baby and as a toddler and as a young boy. And then, I'm not going to get into it, but this theme does carry on throughout the rest of the movie as well by the end of it. And I would have liked more of that stuff. I really think they could have, hit harder with the emotion of this movie. Let's talk about the animation. It's astounding how far this movie has come since 2010's original. The animation was phenomenal in that movie, but you can see it in characters' faces and textures and the amount of stuff they can put on screen at one time. There is so much more going on in this movie, and it's amazing how 9 years of 9 years of technological advancement can really make a difference in everything. I think I even rewatched How to Train Your Dragon, and it's funny when you go back to earlier computer animated movies, because you might not go back to them very often and you kind of watch animated films as the years go on, you don't see the sudden jump in quality between movies. But trust me, watch this movie alongside the original and there is definitely a difference there in the animation. The environments and everything. There's a moment in this movie where they enter the hidden world and it almost looks like Avatar. It's all neon lit and the dragons are lighting up. It's absolutely stunning stuff to watch. So, I can't fault Dreamworks. In fact, Dreamworks might be putting out more stronger stuff in terms of its Kung Fu Panda trilogy and this compared to many Disney films, in my opinion now, or Pixar films as well. It's absolutely terrific stuff, and hats off to every single member of the animation team that brought this film to life. And, I do need to talk about the music as well. John Powell's amazing scores to all three of these movies. Unfortunately, this soundtrack, although it's very good, don't get me wrong, it's fantastic music still, it never quite hit the heights of the previous two soundtracks to me. The main How to Train Your Dragon theme, although still used in this movie, isn't used anywhere near as much as it was in previous movies. And those moments in the other movies were like those real air-punching moments where that theme kicked in, really tugged at the heartstrings and really gave you that sense of adventure. And it's barely used in this movie. It might be used 2 or 3 times, and it never seemed to have that raw power as it did in the other films. And I was let down by that. I was really hoping to hear those reprises of those familiar tracks in full effect, as well as its new music as well. And I think maybe that was another combination as to why I wasn't feeling this movie as much, because the soundtrack really didn't rise to the occasion. Which is a shame, because again, going to Kung Fu Panda 3, the soundtrack to that film might be the strongest soundtrack out of all 3 of those movies, and still did hit those memorable tracks that we had from the previous 2 movies, and this one really didn't do that as much, and I thought that was a very missed opportunity on John Powell's behalf. I'm going to get into my overall recommendation now, and then I'm going to talk a bit about spoilers, especially the ending of this film. So my overall recommendation, would I still recommend How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World? Absolutely. If you've seen the previous 2, this is the end of the story. This is the end of the trilogy. And as I'm about to get into spoilers in a minute, it does round off the story very nicely. It ties it in a nice little bow. It's very emotional. It could have been more emotional for me. And I guess maybe this is another reason that I didn't have such a great time at this movie as I was expecting to. 2 children in this screening that would not shut the fuck up all the way through, especially in the emotional moments. So I'm trying to, watch this movie and get invested in the moment and, cry and well up and have, say goodbye to these characters after 9 years. And these kids were just screaming, shouting, no parents in sight. Parents, don't take your screaming kids to a film if they're not going to sit and watch it. Either tell them to shut up or just don't take them to the movie theatre to see that particular movie. So I would quite like to watch this movie again when it's released on home video, and I can just watch it on my own and just, become more invested in the film. But that was another little thing I wanted to bring up that did kind of mar my enjoyment of this particular film. But overall recommendation, absolutely go and see this movie if you're a fan of the previous 2. It's more of the same. You're getting into the same stuff. And I do think this movie is also self-contained enough where if you haven't seen the previous 2, there's no pressure to go and watch those movies. It does very much bring you into this new adventure and doesn't dramatically link in with the other 2. Although, obviously, you're going to get more enjoyment out of it and more emotional investment if you have seen the previous 2 and have followed the stories up until that point. So that'll do it for my spoiler-free review on How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World. I'm going to get into spoilers now, where I'm going to talk about the ending. So if you haven't seen this movie yet and you are interested in watching it, go and watch it, come back to my review, because I am going to give away the big ending of the movie. So what I liked about this movie is, like, obviously it does end where how you imagine it's going to end, where Hiccup does have to say a final goodbye to Toothless, and, you know, Toothless flies off with the Light Fury to live happily ever after, leaving, you know, Hiccup behind with Astrid. And actually, I didn't mention that in my main review. I really did like the relationship and back and forth and the dialogue between Astrid and Hiccup in this movie. It's nice to see how far they've come and how natural that relationship has grown across all three of the movies. And then we get this sort of epilogue, which I wasn't expecting, actually. I was waiting for it, I guess, because in the trailer you see Hiccup with a full beard, and we hadn't got to that point all the way throughout the entire movie, and I thought maybe that was a deleted scene or something that got cut out. But this is the epilogue, so we fast forward to however many years in the future. Hiccup's with Astrid, and they have 2 children, a boy and a girl, and they're venturing to try and find the dragons. The dragons have, you know, gone off to their hidden world now. That's the reason why humans nowadays can't see dragons, because they're all hidden. And, you know, they go on this voyage and they run into Toothless and the Light Fury, who also in turn have their own children. And we get this reintroduction of Hiccup meeting Toothless again after all these years, and essentially there's that wariness in Toothless, like he doesn't recognise Hiccup. And then obviously they do, and we get the final flyaway with both families sort of flying together through the clouds. And it was a really nice ending. It was a fitting ending and a very conclusive ending. And that's why I don't want them to make any more. I don't think they are going to make any more. That is definitely a brilliant end to the trilogy. And as I said, I probably would have had more of an emotional reaction to it had it not been from the annoying as fuck children in the audience screaming, shouting, banging things off the floor all the way through as I'm trying to watch this very tender moment between characters. But yeah, no, I really enjoyed the ending. In terms of my overall review, again, it is the weakest one in the trilogy, in my opinion, which is a real shame. If this film didn't, like, gut me or anything like that, it's still a good movie. I still enjoyed it, but I didn't enjoy it anywhere near as much as I did the other two. To the point where if I am going to watch this movie again, it will probably be just if I'm doing a marathon of the other ones. If not, I will probably just go back and watch the first two on multiple viewings, because I think they're definitely stronger movies in that regard, in terms of writing, the villains and the characters, and even like some of the emotional moments as well definitely shine through more in those first 2 movies for me. But that'll do it for my review on How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World. Be sure to comment, subscribe, let me know what you thought of this movie. Did you like it? Didn't you like it? How would you rank it in terms of the trilogy? Anything regarding How to Train Your Dragon, please do let me know. There'll be many more movie reviews coming out over the next coming days and weeks. We are getting closer and closer to Academy Awards season, and as such, there are a lot of movies at Academy Awards season, so there are still a lot of films that I need to get watched for then. We'll have reviews on all of them, so please do hit that subscribe button, hit the bell icon as well to stay updated with all of our content. As well as that, on Sunday, it's the Super Bowl. We're going to get a lot of movie trailers for upcoming films, and I will be providing reaction videos for all of those trailers. So that'll do it for me for right now, and until the next video, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.